Hello, my name is Simon Davey. Welcome to Our World in the Limelight and this, the fifth of my woodland habitat talks. Having looked at the New Forest in my last woodland talk, I am now going to visit medieval English deer parks. These result from the use by the aristocracy, from Saxon times onwards, for woodland as a source of deer hunting. Grazing has kept light levels high, and this has resulted in smaller areas of parkland similar to the New Forest. They can be very rich in lichens, and until recently Birkenhead Park in Cornwall held more corticulous lichens than any other woodland in Europe. It has now been overtaken by a woodland in Scotland. Until pollution from the time of the Industrial Revolution onwards, and the change from grazing in woodland to fertilised grassland for livestock, this was a stable habitat for centuries and excellent for lichens. The changes have had a negative effect on woodland wildlife. Without grazing, the shrub and regeneration levels get out of hand, reducing the flowering plant and fungus flora, reducing diversity and the ability of wildlife to move around in the woodland. The lack of light caused by a dense shrub layer reduces the richness of lichens and bryophytes on the main trunks of the trees, where the most diverse floras should be found. Historic records show that much English woodland was very rich in lichens. Old lists for Bradgate Park in Leicestershire, which contains the ruins of the home of Lady Jane Grey, the 8 Days Queen, were especially rich. I suspect that if you look at the central layer of this photograph and go slightly right, you can actually just make out between trees the ruins of Lady Jane Grey's house. However, during the era of sulfur dioxide pollution, it lost most of its lichens. As with the New Forest, medieval deer parks are rather an English feature given their origins. There are exceptionally fine deer parks in County Kerry and Ireland, such as Macross Park, and another fine example of an open parkland, though obviously not medieval, is Whitbourne Park in Newfoundland, which was the subject of an earlier talk. Fine examples of medieval deer parks can be seen in Sussex and include Parham Park, shown here, Eastdean Park on the Goodwood Estate, and Eridge Park and Ashburnham Park. This is a photograph of Eridge Park up in the northeast of the county, close to Tunbridge Wells. And you can see there, particularly in the background, some of the old trees, although there is considerable regeneration going on here, which did need to be controlled. Francis Rose suggested that perhaps they should put wild boar into that woodland. I don't think it ever happened, though. These parks all support very rich lichen floras. At Eastdean Park, there are fine oaks that support Liberia pulmonaria in quantity on their branches. An ash tree used to support the only site for the rare relative of Liberia pulmonaria, Sticta limbata, until the tree fell over in a storm. And it's shown here. It's the bluish one with white edges. Parham Park also held a tree with Liberia pulmonaria until the tree fell into a lake. England contains some particularly fine examples of woodland. A rather extraordinary area may be seen on the north coast of Cornwall. This area is called the Dizzard, which has developed on a steep slope above the sea. It is ancient and has a rich lichen flora, including Liberia pulmonaria, as seen here. It is difficult to see as woodland and did not appear such on early maps. Another West Country wood in Devon, Black Tor Copse, developed close to the summit of Yes Tor in Dartmoor, on sloping ground with abundant rock outcrops. Neither the Dizzard nor Black Tor Copse were felled for shipbuilding, as were so many woodlands in the past, as access and timber removal was not really practical. It is the ancient woodland that contains the rare lichens and other attractive species, such as certain beetles, like this cardinal beetle, Pyracroa coccinea. Flies can be fascinatingly beautiful, and it's hard to think, we don't think of flies as being particularly attractive and beautiful creatures. But what about this one? This hoverfly, Chrysotoxum elegans, good name, this one was photographed at Portland Bill, and Ctenophora ornata, photographed in the New Forest, shown here. More recent woodlands tend to contain a richness of flowers, such as woodland at Ditchling Common in Sussex, shown here. In the spring, bluebells are a magnificent woodland feature, as seen here at Arundel. These are very much a British feature, since on the continent, bluebell bulbs get eaten by wild boar. It was in 1973 that I undertook a lichen project in Cornwall. I found that due to historic iron smelting, there were very few ancient woodlands in the county. It was a surprise when I found the ancient woodland indicator species, the barnacle lichen, Thelotria malefictinum, on a sycamore above Trelawarren Wood. I was so bemused by this, thinking it disputed the use of the barnacle lichen as an ancient woodland indicator, until I went down into the parkland below. Above the park itself, I found beautiful stunted oak with the finest Liberia pulmonaria I have ever seen. I went lower and found high canopy, but dead parkland oaks. There were some particularly important lichens still present. Feeling rather cross that such a disaster should have occurred, I went and spoke to the then owner, who told me he had tried to donate the wood to the then Nature Conservancy and to the Devon Naturalists Trust. Neither were interested, in that the wood did not contain interest in species such as flowering plants, insects and mammals. He then sought advice from the Forestry Commission, who said the wood was dying on its feet and suggested that it should be sprayed with defoliant and underplanted with conifers. Visiting Trelawarren more recently, I'm glad to say that surviving trees still do carry an interesting lichen flora. Another important woodland habitat is coppiced or pollarded woodland, where the tree boles are regularly harvested for poles. Such woodlands can be very rich in biodiversity as they tend to be brighter. The species are usually hazel, sweet chestnut or hornbeam. Epping Forest contains some fine examples of ancient hornbeam coppice and pollards, but one of the finest examples is a private site in Kent, shown here. Here, the pollarded hornbeams are very old, and of importance is the lichen Enterographa elaborata, which otherwise occurs on beech in the New Forest, where it is very rare. It can be seen here to have turned yellow. This is a reaction with the chemical PD, paraphenylene diamine, which proves it to be the species. Chemicals used in this way should be done sparingly, as they are used to confirm usually very rare species. Woodlands are superb places for orchids, and most are very beautiful. Some are extremely rare. There are 3 species that rely totally on rotting leaves for their subsistence and are called saprophytes. One is much more often seen than the others, and there is one on the verge of extinction, if not actually absent from Britain now. The one most frequently encountered is the bird's nest orchid, seen here, Naotea nidus avis, and it is most frequent in beech woodland. It is totally brown and lacking in any chlorophyll. The second is a northern species. It occurs on damp, often mossy ground under woodland and scrub. The photo shown here was actually taken in Iceland. This is the coral root orchid, Corallorhiza trifida. The third is the ghost orchid, Epipodium aphyllum, which has been found in several sites in Britain in the past, but currently is unknown anywhere in the UK. The moment I found it for myself for the first time was one of the biggest thrills of my life. It was a tiny plant with just 1 flower and only a little over 1 inch high. These photographs were taken in the Buckinghamshire site in the early 1970s. A further search that day meant I found a number of plants, including the 2 and 3 flowered ones in these photographs. It seems likely that it will appear again somewhere in the future. I believe that it can survive as roots amongst rotting beech leaves without flowering for a long time. Because of leaves in the summertime, the tree canopy reduces light levels and therefore pollinators. Woodland orchids tend to flower either early or late in the year. A common and very beautiful species in the spring is Orchis mascula, the early purple orchid. Another beautiful species is the slightly less common greater butterfly orchid, Platanthera chlorantha, which has the most beautiful scent. In beechwoods in the spring, the lovely white-flowered large white helleborine, Cephalanthera damascenium, may be seen, which is rather shy about opening its flowers fully, as can be seen in this photograph. Less common, but better at opening its flowers, is the long-leaved helleborine, Cephalanthera longifolia. Much rarer is the very beautiful red helleborine, Cephalanthera rubra, that has just 3 sites in Britain and can be a very sly flower. This photograph was taken in a recently discovered site in southern England. In the autumn, it is the epipactis helleborines that come into flower. The most frequent is the broad-leaved helleborine, Epipactis helleborine. Not quite so frequent is the violet helleborine, with flowers more tinged with purple, and much scarcer is the narrow-lipped helleborine, Epipactis leptochila. Because of the frequent lack of light, the green-flowered helleborine, shown here, Epipactis phylanthes, either never opens its flowers or does so only slightly. It is always self-pollinating. Thank you very much for watching this video. In my next woodland video, I reach the shores of Europe, and this will include the sweet chestnut forests of southern France in the Cevennes. If you have never tasted chestnut bread, you have missed a very special treat. Before that, Amanda will do her next video on a book that has shaped how she sees the world. This one is on art interpretation and changes in understanding across the centuries. Please like, comment and subscribe. Thank you.